we're working through this, that would be great. Okay. Hey, Lynn, do you mind if I mute you, or if you mute yourself? We're just getting a little feedback from your microphone. Thank you. All right, well, welcome to those of you that are just jumping in. Today is our first of many more teacher series events that we're holding this year. We have 4 starting this Tuesday and then coming up the next 3 consecutive Tuesdays, really trying to hone in on some of those core skills related to the systems that'll help folks get up and running for the start of the school year, whether you're a veteran teacher, a new teacher, or even a program leader that's looking to just get some more knowledge to help support your staff. This is definitely a good opportunity to do that. Before we jump in, for those of you that are new to these sessions, my name is Sammy Mantala, and I work with Wisconsin eSchool Network. And I'm the director of partner success, which means I essentially work with all of the programs to make sure that everyone is happy and students are learning and teachers are teaching. We're joined today by 2 other WEN team members. So John Jacobs, he's our director, he's here. And then Lindsay Luciani is going to be co-facilitating this session with me. Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lindsay Luciani. I am new-ish with WEN. I've been part of the WEN team since January, but during that time I've met quite a few of you, but excited to work a little bit closer with some of you this school year. And I am the partner success coordinator. So I do a lot of what Sammy does, but just I'm learning it all as I go. So looking forward to working with you guys this year.
Awesome. All right, well, let's jump in. Lindsay, if you want to change the slide, that'd be great. So objectives for today's session in particular, we're hoping that we're going to articulate the different components of vendor content. So one of our kind of main goals is to just give you guys awareness and knowledge on when you open that section for the first time during the school year, like what are those stock settings and things that are coming with the content off the shelf. The second piece we want to work through is just some guidance on how to hide, remove, what types of settings you should touch, what should you leave alone. And then the third item is we're going to show you how to use the digital library within the learning management system to add some of your own created items to a vendor course. So those are our 3 main objectives. We do have an agenda specific to today, but what you're going to see if you attend some of the following sessions is that each one of the sessions is going to have kind of this same structure where we're going to start with some definitions, just kind of a foundation to set the stage, make sure everybody's kind of using the same language or knowing what we're referencing. We're going to jump into some skill demonstration where Lindsay's going to share her screen actually and walk you through some of the demo components of the skill. And then we're going to talk through some application pieces. So really how to apply what we just showed. And then we're going to save question and answer to the end. So because Lindsay and I are kind of tag teaming the session today, if you have questions throughout, what I would ask is that you either jot them down on a piece of paper to address during the Q&A section, or put them in the chat and I'll make sure that we come back to them at the end. But we really want to kind of hold questions to the end, but feel free to put them in the chat during the session just so that we can kind of make sure we capture them as we're going along. With that, we're going to jump right in. So defining or definitions / lingo related to vendor content. One of the things you're going to hear this on repeat if you kind of attend sessions coming up is that we're going to use the word lessons, assignment, and assessment a lot. And that can kind of take on a different form depending on where you are in education. So a lot of times people will hear assessment and could think formative assessment, summative assessment. It can mean kind of anything. But with relationship to vendor content, when we're talking about those three things in particular, we're actually talking about the way that piece of content is built in the learning management system or in Buzz. So there is actually like a lesson component, and then there's an assignment component, typically referring to different items. Lindsay's going to dive into that and show you the exact distinction between those two, but I really wanted to just set the stage to make sure you guys know when we're talking about those components, we're talking about how it's built in Buzz. Kind of another, just setting the stage, we want everybody to know when you are working with vendor content, you do have the ability to customize it to a certain degree. So you can hide content, you can remove content, you can also add in your own content. So you don't have to just use it off the shelf, you can make it your own. That being said, we are going to sound a little bit like a broken record today, as we are going to continue to just reiterate that the settings on activities and assessments and assignments are pre-populated by the vendor very purposefully. So when you get your course off the shelf, the grade book is set up for you, the points on assignments are set up for you, and typically vendors spend a decent amount of money and have a lot of staff that have really put thought behind that. So you just want to be kind of aware of that in the back of your mind when you start to think about making changes and things to the course, because it really was done comprehensively with the whole course in mind. The other piece we want to just reiterate today is that vendor content is actually linked to a master. And what that essentially means is that if a link breaks to a video in the course that you're teaching, if we report something to the vendor and they fix that link, it's going to come down and get fixed where your kids are and where you're teaching. So that's like a really important component to also keep in the back of your mind, because if you make significant changes to the course, sometimes that link can get severed or broken, and then you will no longer get the updates. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about kind of like the shoulds and should nots related to that as we jump in today. But I just really want you to kind of have that big picture in your mind that, yes, I can make this content my own, but I also should keep in mind that there are a lot of the things in this course were done with a purpose in mind. So some rules. Rules sound so harsh. Maybe we should call them recommendations, but I kind of like the word rules. So we're again talking about modifying vendor content. So digital content that you're getting that is pre-populated. If you're new to teaching a course, when in doubt, leave it the way the vendor said it. I know that that sounds maybe a little bit hard rule, but especially if it's your first year, I would really recommend using the content the way that it was designed until you feel very comfortable with the settings and how students interact with the content before you start making big changes. The second rule we have is know how changes will affect all components of the course before moving forward. If you're unsure, again, leave it as is. Meaning, if you remove, and Lindsay's going to dive into this a little bit later, but if you remove an entire module from a course, that has an impact on like the semester or final exam. So if you remove Unit 2 from the course and students don't go through it, but you do have students take that final or semester exam, there are going to be questions in that exam that address content from Unit 2. So you can kind of see how everything plays together. So just kind of have some more knowledge around that. Number 3 is probably my biggest pet peeve and one that I would recommend. We troubleshoot this a lot throughout the school year, especially at the start of the school year. Be proactive instead of reactive. Meaning if you're going to make changes before students actually start. So I know we're getting down to the wire here, but if you're looking to make large changes to your course, my recommendation would be to make them before the first day of school. Because what happens is if you make a change to something as students are in the course, let's say 2 students take a test, you make a change to that test. Now 3 new students take that test. Only the 3 new students are going to get the change. The 2 students that already took it, it doesn't go back and change the settings for those students. So it only is like moving forward. It doesn't make the change retroactively. So you're going to have students then that have kind of 2 different experiences. So my just rule of thumb is if you can do something before any students get to that part in the course, that's really what you want to do. And then last, obviously, the more a course is changed by a teacher, the harder it is for your program leader, for you, and for us to help troubleshoot should things go awry. So we're really good at knowing how a vendor has set up the course and kind of how to troubleshoot that way. But if you've made significant changes, it's not that we can't support you. It's just that it takes more time and sometimes it makes it more difficult. So I'm not trying to scare you away from making changes to the course, but I just want you to be fully aware of kind of the downstream impact that some can have. For those of you that have joined us throughout the introduction, I just want to reiterate, if you have questions throughout the session, as Lindsay's going to start sharing her screen now, please put those questions in the chat as we have a designated Q&A section at the end of the session where we'll jump into the questions that everybody has. Lindsay, I'm going to mute myself if you want to take it away.
All right. Sammy's talked to you a lot about the different kind of guidelines, we'll call them, not rules. Guidelines when working in Buzz or with vendor content in Buzz. So I want to kind of jump in just a second and show you a little bit more about what that looks like, actually give you kind of a feel for how it's going to look when you're in Buzz. But before I do that, I want to take just a second and kind of point out a few things. I know some of you are a little more familiar with Buzz, but for those of you that aren't as familiar, Buzz does a really good job of using icons as visual indicators when you're working in the learning management system. So today we're going to focus in more on like a specific course in Buzz, but just know that in a future session, we'll get into more of like Buzz and all the components and kind of what you can do in that regard. But either way, I think the 2 most important visual indicators or icons for me at least are understanding the 2 views that are an option for you when you log into Buzz. So there's the activities view, which kind of mimics exactly what the students see when they're in Buzz. And that's always shown with a triangle and with a circle around it. It's like a play button. But I said that to my 8-year-old daughter the other day about a play button, and she had no idea what I was talking about because I was like, on a VCR, and then it's never mind. So that always kind of indicates the activities view, what the students see. And then a pencil is the editor view or just the ability to edit something. So I do find myself anytime I'm in Buzz, I'm like, oh, I want to be able to edit this. I kind of look around for that pencil icon because that shows me that I can edit it. These other icons I'm going to kind of go over once we jump in. But another important thing to note is when you're working in Buzz, I might show you 1 or 2 different workflows or how to access something in Buzz, but there are many different ways to access a lot of different things in Buzz, and you will find the workflow that works best for you. So if you have a different way of getting somewhere, totally fine if that works for you. I'm just going to kind of show you some of the more common ones. So now I'm going to actually jump into Buzz here. So you would start with being in your Genius as a teacher, and I know some of you have multiple different roles in Genius. So just make sure when you're using this drop down that you're in teacher. Some of you might not have a drop down, and that's fine. Then you would just click go to LMS.
Lindsay, can you make your browser just a little bit bigger so it fills the screen?
Yep. I have an extra wide
I gotcha.
monitor, sometimes it stretches things out. So if it does, just let me know. Do you want me to zoom in still?
Yeah, maybe just a skosh.
Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yep, thank you. So you're going to click on yours would say your affiliation name, your program, your school district. You would click on go to Buzz or go to LMS. And then you're going to have two options. It'll either say use as a teacher or use as a student, unless you've checked this box because you've been in here before. Again, in another session, we'll kind of go into more detail about why you might have used as a student, but for today's purposes, we're going to be in as a teacher. And then you're going to see your course homepage. So you can see the tiles for your different courses. Here's kind of some of those icons I was referencing. So the activities view, the editor, you can also get to those with the pancake menu on the side. We call that, sorry, a pancake menu because it looks like a little stack of pancakes. If you select a course over here, then you'll see the same thing, activities or editor. I tend to just click on a tile. And when you click on a tile, you'll see in a second, it just takes you to the activities view. So I'm going to click on this English course. And now I can see the activities view, which mimics what the students see to an extent. And we'll get into that in just a second. The students cannot see unit 2 or unit 3. I can see that those are still available as the teacher, but they have this red eye icon that indicates that they're hidden from students. Next, I'm going to kind of jump into the editor just to go over those visual icons with you. So now I'm in the editor view. This is kind of like the teacher's view, like from their perspective, kind of everything within the course. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up just one of these units so we can kind of take a look at these other icons. We have 3 specific icons that I want you to focus on today in terms of vendor content. So Sammy talked before about vendor content coming in as like a link to a master. And we're going to kind of see what that looks like with this first icon, which is a piece of paper, and it has no text on it. It's blank. It's a blank piece of paper. So if I click on that assignment or lesson, I can see when I'm down here that all I can see is a link. I cannot edit anything, and that's purposeful. That is lesson content that comes in from the vendor. If I go to settings, this is an area where if it is a piece of paper with no writing, our recommendation would be don't adjust any of these settings. Piece of paper, no lines, nothing on it, is lesson content that it's almost when the student looks at it, I'm going to show you. You can see it is built within the vendor's platform. So it's almost like it has its own navigation, it's content that the students will take a look at. So you do not want to edit this icon, pieces of paper with nothing on it. That's lesson content. Down here, there's a similar icon. I'm going to open up one. It's a piece of paper, but it does have some like lines on it. This is an assignment. However, you are able to add some extra instructions here. So this one currently, it says submit the assignment following the instructions in the lesson, but you could personalize this to make it, more for your students. Elementary teachers sometimes will take a picture of like the specific worksheet they want students to actually submit here as a visual indicator for students, and they can put that here. Some things, if I look at the settings, this is where you could adjust visibility and access. And then there are a couple of other things that you kind of want to make sure that you leave as is. So again, Sammy talked about vendors using a lot of thought and time and energy into why things are set up the way they are. And when you start messing with some of these other settings, that's where it can get a little bit dicey and you might end up breaking that link or creating different issues further on down the road. So here, when you see the piece of paper with just the writing, it's nice because you can personalize the messaging a little bit. But other than that, you may want to leave these settings as is.
Lindsay, can I just jump in for 1 second? I'll just reiterate what you said. You did a good job there of explaining like that section. For the most part, most of our vendors, that little description box area that Lindsay was showing, they leave that very generic. So like what it says there is typical of a Florida virtual school course. A lot of the other courses say something very similar. this is my bias, but I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity to give kids maybe a little bit more guidance or to personalize their review before the assignment. So I've seen some really unique things done, and Lindsay's example of the elementary was a very positive outcome of last year. So just something to consider.
Thank you. And then the last icon I want to look at is this assessment icon, which is like a piece of paper and almost looks like a Scantron with like bubbles that you fill in and a check mark. Here you'll see again that you can, there's that opportunity to personalize it, kind of make it your own here. And that, that's a great place to do that. In settings, this is where you're going to want to rely on your program or your school district's policy related to some things with assessment. So a couple of things to take a look at here are like number of attempts. Your school district or your program's policy might be to let the students take assessments an unlimited number of times until they reach proficiency. So this is something that you could make an adjustment on and it would not break that link. Another item that you can feel confident making an adjustment to based on your program would be like a time limit, whether or not you want to have a time limit on that assessment. The thing to note though is now I have this option for questions. I like to think of it as if it's related to content at all, I like to not mess with it, because if it's content related, like these questions or those lesson content, I don't want to break that link. So I view questions, like assessment questions, as content. They are related to content. So my suggestion and our recommendation would be to leave the assessment questions as is, excuse me. Again, because of that link. So if they find a certain assessment has a question that doesn't have a great answer and they adjust it, you want to get those adjustments in your course. You want them to kind of link down. So that's why I like to make sure that I don't do anything that's going to break that link, especially your first time through one of these courses. All right. Now
back to one more thing for me on the settings of those assessments.
Mhm.
I may be diving a little too deep into this, but I'm just going to do it anyways for just a second. Will you scroll down one little bit?
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or am I getting ahead of you?
No, I didn't know if it would be more confusing or not. So go for it.
Yeah, I hear you. So one of the things I just want to, a lot of the vendor assessments, one of the best things about them is they're pulling from a pool of questions. So like this quiz might only be 20 questions long, but it's pulling from a pool of say 150 questions. And it's all dependent upon the content. So they're in that pool, there might be 10 questions related to this standard, 10 questions related to this standard, 10 questions related to this, and then it pulls like 1 or 2 questions per standard. So when you start kind of messing with those things, you're messing with the questions that kids are getting related to the content that they've covered in the lesson. So again, I just want you to be aware that this is there, but it's also kind of helpful to just know like the thought that's been put behind some of these assessments, that there are a lot of questions that are being used to pull for these assessments. So.
And standards driven, like they're purposefully are trying to align it with a specific number or group of standards. So again, when you start adjusting those things, then you kind of throw off that balance. Same thing with up here. If you notice in the activity settings, thank you for bringing this back up, Sammy. Feel confident in adjusting like the number of attempts, because that won't break that link. But if you do start checking things like randomizing question order, you want to stay away from that, because a lot of times vendors will ask questions or have questions that are sequential. And if you start randomizing things, it's going to totally throw that off. So just some things to avoid. Now I kind of want to.
Can I say one more thing too?
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting you, but I just want to say, when we say like everything that we're saying is not like 100% the case for every single course title, right? But we're giving you kind of like the things we've seen most common. And so you may run across an assessment that doesn't have sequential questions, right? But that's not always the case. So we're kind of like erring on the side of caution versus giving you like the concrete, every single assessment has a set sequential questions, right? So just, I want you to know it's not like 100% that way.
No, it's a perfect segue. So we did in the slides that we will share with you following at the end of this session, you will get a resource and you'll have this information. We did try to outline some of the big things just to kind of keep in mind when making changes or adjustments to vendor content. Note that this is not like an exhaustive list. This is not everything under the sun that will or won't break the link. We just wanted you to have like a point of reference. So like, what do they say again? What can I change? What can I change? So this is here and you'll have access to this. The next thing we want to jump into now is kind of that skill of hiding content in Buzz. So as a teacher in any course, we want you to feel confident that like you have the ability to determine like what you should or shouldn't include in your course. And we're going to dive in just a second back into Buzz so you can kind of see this in action, and I'll go over it in more detail. But it's recommended that you hide content rather than delete it, and I'll show you why. It's essentially the same. And then whether you hide or delete, either action will significantly impact the student and teacher's gradebook and pacing guide, which Sammy alluded to this a little bit, but I'll kind of touch on it a little bit further. And then how you can avoid negatively impacting the student experience. Again, I'm broken record here, but it's to be proactive and make changes before your students have their first day, which I understand is getting down to the wire, but again, you're going to avoid a lot of potential questions and just confusion across the board. So I'm going to jump back into Buzz now and kind of go into hiding and deleting content. You are able to fully delete content. That is a possibility. My recommendation, however, our recommendation would just be that you hide it because essentially it's the same. And then you can always change your mind, or you always have the ability to determine like, oh, you know what, I do want to use that. The idea of hiding content is very easy. It's not like it's a hard process. It's just understanding kind of what goes into it. And I think that's where it comes down to the pacing guide. So you may notice here, I have clicked on the I, and I have hidden these from students, both of these two items. It's that simple to hide something. You can hide something at the full folder level, or you can, you know, hide individual assignments within the folder. But another thing to note is I know that a lot of teachers like to use screencasts. So now I went back to the activities view, and the activities view mimics what a student sees to an extent. So now here I can still see this red like X crossed out I, indicating that students cannot see this. And if I'm a teacher that uses screencasting a lot, I don't want that there. I want it to actually mimic what the students see. So you do have the ability to do that as well. If I would come back to the editor view, and it's kind of nice, it does indicate this for you. If I am clicked on Unit 2, over on the side here, there's a check mark where it says visible in table of contents. And that right away tells me like it's visible in my table of contents, even though the students can't see it. So if I want to turn that off, I can open up this assignment, go to settings, and then you can see under visibility and access. Right now it's only visible to teachers, but I can click on this hide from table of contents. And now that won't show up in my teacher activities view. So I can show you that. I only did it for Unit 2. So now you don't see Unit 2 at all. So if you're a teacher that really likes to use screencast and you want it to mimic exactly what students see, that can be helpful. You have the ability to adjust that. I'm going to go back to the editor to talk about hiding content in terms of pacing guide. So in a very high level explanation of the pacing guide is that these courses come into the from the vendor, and they're set up as continuous. What that means is that when you have a student or your program leader enrolls a student and they give them a start date and an end date, the system takes the start date and the end date, and they take the number of assignments in the course, and they kind of evenly distribute those and give the student target due dates. It's individualized for each student. So if you have a student that joins your class, 2 weeks after the school year started, their pacing guide will look different than the student who started on the first day of class. It's individualized. But if you start to hide things or remove things when the pacing guide has already started, when the student has already started class, it's going to mess up their pacing guide continually as you make those changes. So I want to kind of show you an example of that. Right now, I have units 2 and unit 3 hidden to students. The only unit they can see is unit 1. So if I would open up, now I'm logged in as a student here. I'm going to expand this, so it's not too confusing. I'm going to launch into this course as a student. We'll do that one more time. And then you're going to see if I go to, it's going to take me to the activities view right away because I am a student. I can kind of see I've finished all these activities, got all my green check marks for the most part. If I would go to the student grade view and take a look up here, I can see like, okay, great. I have 16 of 16 gradable activities completed, and I have about 89% of all activities completed. So I'm like, yes, I'm doing great. My pacing guide's on a roll. Then the teacher might decide, you know what, I think I'm going to make unit 2 visible now. So I'm going to unhide this. And I might, unit 3, I'll do at the same time. Then if I come back to my student view and I refresh, now suddenly my pacing looks totally different. And if I'm a student or a student's parents that's heavily relying on this, that might get a little bit confusing, and you might receive some emails and things like that. So making those changes for what you're going to hide proactively instead of reactively is a great idea to avoid some of that confusion. Anything to add, Sammy?
No, that was super helpful. The only thing I would say is when Lindsay referenced continuous, which was the way the course is set up, that is how the default way you're going to get courses. There are other ways to set up your course. We're not going to dive into that today. We're going to do it in actually the next session that's offered next Tuesday. But I just, this is kind of like the majority of the way that teachers are using courses. So we wanted to touch on that. And the impact of hiding content is slightly different, but slightly the same for the other setups. So again, we're going to talk more about that in the next session. We just wanted to give you kind of that preview.
Can I just add one thing on that? So application K5 versus 612 with pacing guide impact, just be thoughtful about that, especially with the K5 grade levels. One of the things that we see pretty commonly across partners is, and again, not to go into the next session, but people who are really concrete with the pacing deadlines generally use a different setup. Otherwise, we advise people to say suggested due dates, suggested pacing. And then obviously at the instructional level, you have more control to kind of manage that expectation with students. Reason being in that range, it just gives you a little bit more wiggle room with families should things change downstream. So just kind of a suggestion that we provide partners to help kind of mitigate some of the confusion.
Okay, Lindsay, was there a slide before this?
Sammy, there's a question in the chat.
There was, but it's the slide that I went over regarding hiding and deleting.
Gotcha. Thanks, John. We're gonna keep going here and I'll address the questions in the chat after, once we get to the Q&A section. One thing we wanted to know is one of the courses you were seeing today from Lindsay, she didn't dive a ton into the course, was actually a Florida virtual school course, but you can see here, new this year, we have these vendor guides, which your program leaders do have access to, but really these give a high level, review or information on different vendors. So some of you may be using, a smattering of different digital content from different vendors. So in the slides that you're going to get after today's session, you'll have these links and be able to take a look at these. I'm actually going to take Lindsay to the second page. The first page is really more kind of for your program leader. I think that would be more applicable there. But when you're diving into the second and third pages, the second page is what Lindsay's showing right now. It does have some baseline information about the course structure and then kind of that layout appearance. So in this instance, you can see there's the elementary course layout and then the middle high school. So it just gives you kind of that surface level idea of how the vendor is set up, which can be helpful in combination with some of the knowledge that we gave you today about like the back end setup. So again, you'll have access to these after the session. You can see here too, you get a little bit of information about the instructional design, which I actually think would be super helpful as a new teacher using digital content, because you can see on the left-hand side or the top, I'm looking top left or top right. You can really see how the course is structured. So the types of activities that the vendor uses, they use assignments, meaning drop boxes, or discussions. And then you can also see kind of the breakdown of the assessments that are in the course. So for instance, FLVS typically always has a module pretest and then a module unit test. So you can kind of get an idea of like, oh, this course is structured this way. I know what I like to use, what I don't like to use. So I think these will be helpful for you as you're just taking a look, maybe for the first time, or maybe you're a veteran teacher looking at a new course title.
Okay, thanks, Sammy.
You bet.
Next, we are going to get into the application part of today's session. So using your digital filing cabinet, or it might be called teacher resources, for you on your space. And just note that I'm going to probably refer to it as a digital filing cabinet, but teacher resources, digital filing cabinet, they are the same with just different names depending on program or district. Essentially what it is it's a space that's yours that will kind of roll over as you continue to be an online teacher with your program, where you can be creative. You can create assignments and not like just different flyers, different assessments, but what you create there, you don't have to worry that like students are going to see it. You can kind of be creative and kind of explore the space there. And we'll get into that a little more again in another session. But for today's purposes, we want to make sure you know how to hide something from a course, but also how to bring something in or add something that you've made. So the next slide is going to go over kind of the exact instructions for how to do this. But instead of reading these to you, I'm going to show you here in just a second, but that's there for reference when we share this out with you after the session. So I am going to jump back into Buzz. I'm going to go back to my courses home. And you can see here that I have like my course tiles, but then I also have my demo teacher's digital filing cabinet. And if I go ahead and open this up or just click on the tile, it takes me to the activities view. And you can see I have a couple of folders. So I have a start here folder. Then I have folders that are named to match the titles of my courses, and that's purposeful. That's something that we recommend. Very helpful when you're pulling in content from your digital filing cabinet. And we will again get into that in a later session a bit more. But for today's purposes, I kind of want to just show you in the editor view, kind of what I have in my start here folder. And the reason I've separated this stuff in the start here folder rather than having it for a specific course is this is information that I want to include in any one of my courses at the beginning of the year. So it's not married to a specific course, whereas in like my English folder, I have kind of like more English type assignments, things that I'll use in that course. So the Start Here folder is stuff that can be used in any course. So that's just a look at kind of how my digital filing cabinet is set up. I've already
Hey,
had the
Lindsay, question for
Yeah.
you. All of those things that you just showed in the editor of your digital filing cabinet or teacher resources course were things that you created, correct?
correct.
Okay.
And that's why when you take a look, just a second. Yep, these are all things that I've created. So this is that creative space. I almost like to think about your digital filing cabinet or your teacher resources as like my Google Drive, but of Buzz. Because if I'm making something or I want to, use something again and again, I want to make it here. So I know where it is and then I have access. I'm not going to lose it or it's not going to go away when the course is over or something like that. So these are all things that I've created and they live in my digital filing cabinet for teacher resources. So now I've got all this awesome Start Here stuff that I've spent a lot of time building. Now I want to put that into my courses. So I'm going to go back to the courses homepage. I'm going to open up this English course again. And I want to add this information to my welcome folder. I want to have the information about me here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my editor. And I could just click on this add activity, but that doesn't put it in a folder. And like we said, there's a ton of different workflows in Buzz. I know I want this in my welcome folder. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to use this plus sign. And then again, these steps like the specific click here are laid out in the slides that you're going to have. So just know that as I'm kind of moving through this, I'm going to click library. And then you will select I think it's like a little briefcase that is your affiliation. I'm going to select when demo, and then I'll see my course tiles. I know that I want to add something that I've made. So if I've made it, it's going to be in the digital filing cabinet, teacher resources area. And then I want to look at my Start Here folder. I know I want to add in my welcome to class. I'm going to do this one separately than my other ones on purpose. So then you have a decision to make. Once you've checked what you want to add, you can either link it or you can copy it. The linking option is very similar to like your vendor master course. It basically gives the student a link to look at your original file that you've created in your teacher resources. This welcome to class with Miss Tanner, I'm going to link. So now if I take a look at it within my welcome folder, I can even see a little link here. I did that on purpose. So the reason I did that is because if I would open this up, this linked item that I created, it will not let me edit it. And I did it on purpose because I don't want to be in my English class and I find an error or something and I make a change here. I don't want to be able to do that because then if I can edit it here, it's only going to change it here. And I want this to be used in all my courses. And I only want to have to edit it or make adjustments one time. So I've linked the content. That doesn't mean that I can't edit it. It just means I cannot edit it here. I have to edit it in my digital filing cabinet because that's where it was created. So this file I decided to link. Then I'm going to go back and add one more thing. So I'm going to come up to this welcome folder again, click on the plus sign, library, affiliation or program, my digital filing cabinet, select the folder. And now I'm going to do my contact information. This time, instead of linking it, I'm going to copy. I'm doing that on purpose, and I'll show you why. That essentially makes its own copy, a new one right here in your course. So now if I would open up this contact information, I have highlighted this because I know that I am going to have different Zoom office hours for different courses. So now as I'm editing this, I decide I'm only going to do the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then I'm going to remove these office hours because these are for a different class, a different course. Now I've edited it, but it's only editing this copy. It's not editing the one that's in the digital file cabinet. That one's left as is. It's only editing this version because it's essentially its own copy, like on a copy machine. If I would copy something and then make changes on the copy, it's not going to affect the original. So then I can save it. And now both of those items are in that welcome folder. If I would come back to the activities view, I can see they're both there. that is how you can add content from your digital filing cabinet or teacher resources. Again, those instructions, kind of the walkthrough, are here, and a brief explanation of linking versus copying, because it can get a little confusing. But we just wanted you to have that available. Know that when we are done with the session after the Q&A, we are going to send out a session recap with some resources. I can show you what that looks like.
Lindsay, I have one thing to add.
Okay, do you want me to?
Related to the, will you go to Buzz?
Okay,
So I'm gonna be the bearer of bad news. The reason why the digital filing cabinet or the teacher resources course is so important if you're going to be personalizing your vendor digital content in any way, shape, or form is that every year, every school year, you're going to get clean sections. So you're going to get a new section of content. So anything that you added to the course this year is not going to be there next year. If you add it in your digital filing cabinet or teacher resources course, it's super simple to just go in the way Lindsay just did and basically like click and link or click and copy into your fresh sections next year. So it's a way of future-proofing yourself and giving yourself like that easy access to all of the hard work you've put in creating some personalized content. So I just want to reiterate that as kind of like a reason why we want you to lean on that digital filing cabinet or teacher resources course.
and if you get in the habit of it right away, it's easier, because it's really easy, I think, as a teacher to be in here and to start building and creating and then not realize, shoot, I'm not gonna have access. So I think if you get into the habit right away of building your stuff in that digital filing cabinet or teacher resources, then it just kind of, you save yourself a lot of redoing stuff on the back end. Okay, I'm gonna kind of go back and show you what we do plan to email each of you after this session, after the Q&A. You'll get this, and it's going to include the recording from today, the slides, those vendor guides, and then some additional tutorials for just things we kind of touched on today that you can reference and use as you need them. So everything we went over, you will have access to like the stuff we showed you and all of that. All right, should we head into Q&A then, Sammy?
Yes,
All right.
thanks.
Yeah.
So a couple questions in the chat. Janine asked a good question about when you add assignments or quizzes or things that are like gradable that you want to add. She talks about a little bit of like how that integrates into the grade book. We're going to dive into that in a deeper way in the third session coming up. So Janine, thanks for surfacing that, but I don't necessarily want to dive in the weeds on that today, but we'll hold it for then. Thank you. Lynn has a few questions. She asked, if you change an assessment question, does it break the link for just that question or the entire assessment or the entire course? So I can tell you it does not break the entire course link. That I know for sure. Depending on, I'm going to have to dig a little bit more to get a 100% confirmed answer for you related to the whole assessment. Like let's say you change one of 10 questions in the pretest, whether it just breaks the link for that question or that whole pretest. And I don't want to make an assumption there. I kind of have a gut feeling, but I'd rather get a confirmed answer for you. And I'm also not sure if that differs per vendor. It might. So it's not a clean cut answer for you. So I'm just going to have to follow up, Lynn, on that one. But you shouldn't be afraid it won't break the whole course link. Like you're still going to get some of that lesson content update and stuff like that. Our courses from previous years archived so you can go back and look at them. You're not going to like my answer to this one either. So the answer is yes, they are archived. So we keep everything. So you can go back and look at student data, your program leaders, but you don't have easy access to it. So it's removed from your teacher account. But if you would need to go back and access something, right, that is very important, you would need to reach out to your program leader, and then they would need to work with us to kind of figure out how is the best way to give you access to it. The only reason I've seen that happen is actually more for like looking at archived or inactive completed enrollment, so like student data. But when it comes to content that you've created, that's where we want you to do it in your digital filing cabinet or teacher resources course, because then you have it no matter if your course from last year was archived or not. So I don't know if you have a specific thing you're thinking about, but
You'd also have access to it as soon as you need it. So you wouldn't have to, like if it was in a digital file, you wouldn't have to wait for like that chain, which could take, days.
Just to expand on that a little bit more, I have an AE course and it's on Google Docs and or the Google Suite, and Google changes the location of where the buttons are sometimes, and the tests don't always get updated. So I have kind of changed those questions to reflect the correct answer. And I'm not sure I made a list of which ones I changed. If I can go back and look at that archive, maybe I can tell.
give me a little bit more. So give me your course title, first of all.
Computer basics.
Okay. And tell me just in quickly without diving into the weeds. And hopefully you guys know that the point of this Q&A session is to get in the weeds a little bit. That's why we saved it to the end. So if you feel like you've gotten what you need out of the session, you can definitely feel free to leave and we will follow up with the resources. If you want to stay and just listen in case you glean some little tidbit, feel free to stay too. Computer basics. When you say, are you using Google Docs within the course?
Yes, and I've used Google Docs rather than the digital filing cabinet because I teach for multiple schools, and then I can just grab it from my Google Docs and put it in.
Mm-hmm.
But the place that it wouldn't be in a Google Doc is when I change an assessment question.
Yeah.
I don't think I answered your question correctly.
No, I was just, so you're looking in an archived course to try to get where you changed an assessment question?
Yeah.
Yeah. You work for, you said Stevens Point?
Yeah, I also work for Jedi.
Lynn, I might have to follow up with Dana on this one, your program leader, just a little bit to see if it's like, just to think through options on it for you.
Yeah, I don't think you should spend a lot of time digging on that one because Google changes stuff often enough that I have to go through those quizzes in that course and make sure that the answers are correct.
Are they questions that you've created or questions that are coming from AE that are referencing something incorrect in Google?
They're coming from AE and they're referencing incorrect information in Google. Sometimes, like, for example, it'll say, if you want to delete an email, click on the trash button that is located in the upper right corner. Well, Google moved it to the lower right corner.
I gotcha.
And I need to make some just fine tuning kinds of things.
So you shouldn't have to do that. That is the beauty of using vendor content. So what you should do, and I know this stinks because what you want to do is make the change, right? So that it's there for your students right away and it's correct. So I get that like immediacy of it. But ideally, if we could be just a little bit patient, what we would love is for you to get that information to Dana, who would get it to us, and we'd get it in front of the vendor and they would correct it. And then it would come right down to your section and you'd see the change. Now I know that there's a delay in that, right? So I get it. Ideally though, if you wanted to make the change anyways, I would still appreciate it if you got the changes you made, like this was incorrect, to us anyways, after you corrected it. That way for like the future, like this year when you got your new section, it would be right. That would be our goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Usually I catch them when I'm going through and looking at the graded work to see where the students made a lot of mistakes. And when I see couple students making the same mistake. I'm like, oh, is that correct? And then I go
Yeah,
and look from there. So it's a lot of times if the answer was wrong, I just give them credit for getting it right.
yeah.
Override
I
it.
mean, that type of information is really helpful, and I can tell you that vendors are very responsive and like to get that information to make sure that their content is up to date. So whichever way you choose, I would just ask that you try to get that information up the chain so that we can help make the course better.
Sure.
Thanks for surfacing that, Lynn.
Yep.
Any other questions? Well, with that, I would say thanks for joining us. And like Lindsay said, we will follow up to everyone that was registered for the session with that great resource, as well as the slides and the recording. And then hopefully we'll see you in an upcoming session. Again, they are the next 3 Tuesdays after today. And next session is about general Buzz navigation, like the teacher app, course settings, those types of things. And we jump into Gradebook. And then the final session is on Genius. So we're moving out of Buzz into Genius and talking about communicating and progress monitoring. So hopefully we'll see you guys at an upcoming session. Happy Tuesday.
Hey, Lindsay, I've got a question for you.
Yep.
Can you pull up your, pull up the assessment?
Lindsay, will you stop the recording?
Yeah.
I'll do that quick.